Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today's episode, we are going over the start and impact of the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company, so stick around. But first, I've got some dates coming up, so come on out and see me. We're going to be May 31st, I'll be at the Reno River Festival. June 8th, I'll be at the Knights Ferry Music Festival, or it's the Knights Ferry Art and Music Festival. And then June 20th, I'll be at Red Bus Brewing. I had a previous date, June 14th, that was canceled. So we're not doing the Colusa County Fair anymore, but we're still doing the Knights Ferry Art and Music Festival and Red Bus Brewing on June 20th. So come on out and see me. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at TylerandCo_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything. Everything. When he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. Marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. Okay, so the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company was kind of the first company to start up in Nashville and kind of start the machinery of the music business. Like, it all grew out of Acuff-Rose because, you know, initially, country music was not taken as seriously as other genres. Like, jazz was big. I mean, we're way back into, like, the 30s, like, late 20s and 30s here. Jazz was big, you know, pop music was big. And jazz and pop had this big machinery behind them, you know, and with record sales and things like that. But country music was kind of left out because it was still kind of hillbilly music. And you just get a lot of, you know, there was a lot of live radio play, but there weren't a lot of record sales going on. And so to fill that void, starts off with two guys, Roy Acuff and Fred Rose. And the reason we're doing this episode is because these two guys bounce off every big name you've ever heard of. And they were huge. They were, you know, instrumental in starting the careers of, you know, all the legends that we know of, or at least having a part in their careers. So, excuse me. So it starts off in 1903, Roy Acuff is born. So he's, I think, September of 1903. And his family life he's one of these guys where his family life is, you know, really stable. He grows up playing sports. He's got a really supportive family behind him. And he actually had a dream of becoming a professional baseball player. And he was invited to try out for a team that was actually like one of the, at the time, I guess it was the New York Giants, like one of their, like, you know, I think it was like their single A team or something. But he was invited to try out to go pro. And he does. And he quickly, somehow, during spring training, I guess, when he's out there trying to, you know, become a professional baseball player, he gets severe sunstroke, which I guess heat stroke, I guess. But so he passes out on the baseball field. And that leads to all kinds of issues. Suddenly, after that first, you know, heat stroke, his body just freaks out anytime it gets even remotely hot. So it becomes so much of a problem that it ends his baseball career. He just like can't be out on the field anymore because he keeps passing out and having panic attacks, and he can't hang anymore with the baseball life. Which, you know, was obviously sad for him, but he quickly seems to transition over to music. So he was from a musical family. I think his mom played piano. And he grew up, singing in church and doing the whole, family band thing. And so that was in 1929 that he, 1929, his sunstroke ends his baseball career. So he turns to music. He's playing, piano and guitar and fiddle. Fiddle mostly because when he was convalescing. So there's a phase here where Roy Acuff is like bedbound. And he's just, laying in bed playing his dad's fiddle and kind of, listening to the radio. And anyway, so he ends up getting on like one of these traveling medicine shows, so it was called Doc Howard's Medicine Show, which back in the day, Elvis Presley did a similar thing later where like the medicine shows were like, like a snake oil salesman, like, well, we have this, tincture that'll solve, baldness or whatever, like whatever they were trying to sell you at the time. The way they would draw a crowd to the truck was they would bring talent with them. So like, music acts. And so they'd get up on the back of the truck, play their music, a crowd would gather. When the music was over, they get up and they're like, wow, we've got you here. Try our, magic tinctures. And so that's how a lot of guys get their start back then. And remember, this is like, this is 1932. So this is very early. We're like, imagine like, oh brother, where art thou phase here, like that kind of thing, like that crowd size, that level of technology. This is just guys out in the middle of nowhere standing on flatbed trucks. And anyway, so he gets a chance to perform on the radio in I think in Knoxville, and he starts to build a little bit of a local following, which that momentum just builds and builds and builds over time. So then in 36, he records a song called The Great Speckled Bird, which that was kind of his first big, hit. It wasn't like I said, at the time, it had the effect of, making him a household name, but there wasn't a ton of money coming in because the mechanism wasn't there for country artists to be receiving proper royalties and record sales and things like that. Like that machinery just didn't exist. But he becomes, people are requesting his music all the time. He's big on the radio. And so then let's see here. So he gets married in 1936 to a lady named Mildred Douglas. And then in 1938, he joins the Grand Ole Opry. So that's kind of his trajectory to where he gets to the Opry. And then, all right, so, and when he gets to the Opry, like I said, excuse me, he's a relatively big name, and he's starting to, when he's performing on the Opry, he's becoming like a big integral part of that. And this is early Opry. I mean, we're talking like, I don't think the Opry even had an official roster of members until like just before this. Like it was just a collection of whoever the radio could get to show up. And then after a certain point, they kind of formalized the roster. But so, Roy Acuff is one of the first guys to do that. All right. Cut to Fred Rose. These guys are similar in age. So I think Roy Acuff's born in 1898. So, he's 5 years older than Roy Acuff. And he's born in Indiana. And he has kind of a similar, storyline when he's young. He's not in sports or anything, but kind of like seemingly stable upbringing. But he ends up in Chicago as like a vaudeville pianist. And he's wildly talented as a songwriter and as a musician. And he becomes like a, in the music industry, which is well established for jazz and pop and all this stuff. Fred Rose comes up in that machinery and is really successful pretty, early on. And he's becoming known as a songwriter and just like a session guy. So let's see here. So this is let's see here. He learns to play, he teaches himself the piano in 1910. So when he's like, 13 or something, 12 maybe. Let's see here. So he gets married pretty early on. I think he gets married when he's 20, and he has a son named Wesley. Okay, so his son Wesley is born in Chicago. And like I said, so he got married when he was 20, has a son relatively quick after. So he has kids young. Now, both Roy Acuff and Fred Rose are married throughout their entire storyline. Like, they're not doing the rock star thing. They're both like family men, and they stay married to the same lady the whole time. And they have, they have families. And, but so Wesley becomes a bigger part of the story later. Because, like I said, I mean, I think Fred Rose is only like 20 or 22 when Wesley's born. So he's, doing the vaudeville thing, playing music in Chicago. And then, let's see here. He moves to Nashville after he's got some success already built up. Like I said, he's a known talented songwriter and musician. And ending up I think he moved to Nashville somewhere in the early 30s. And so this is where him and Roy Acuff meet. Now, the dynamic here... Oh, also, okay, so they meet and they kind of know each other. They're both working at WSM, and they're kind of like down the hall from each other. And Roy Acuff is enjoying the success of, becoming a household name and getting some money coming in. And his wife actually just, so at this point, Roy Acuff had like 40 hit songs or more. Like, he had a bunch. And his wife convinces him to write these 40 songs into a book and like put it out on the radio that you could like order one of these books from. And he takes his own money, he orders up 1,000 copies and then puts it out on the radio. Next thing you know, 10,000 letters come in to WSM with like $1 bill and a return address. So they just start sending these music books out to everybody. Suddenly, Roy Acuff's doing pretty good in the money department. Like, he's got a pretty nice nest egg going just from selling his book of songs. And that kind of gets the idea going in his head that maybe there's a gap to fill on the music publishing end of this. But Roy Acuff's a musician and he's a creative guy, and he's not like, he doesn't have a ton of business acumen, and he's not super enthusiastic about that idea. So, but he's got this chunk of money from selling this music book. So cut to, him and Fred Rose become friends. And Fred Rose had sort of the opposite kind of orientation. So like Roy Acuff had some money and he's a good front man. He likes performing. He's out there being famous. Fred Rose had come up in the music business in Chicago, and he understood how royalties worked, and he understood how record sales worked, and he had a better understanding of the business end of it. That's not to say he was good at it. He just had a better understanding than Roy Acuff did. So these two guys decide, all right, we're going to throw in together. Roy Acuff put $25,000 in an account with Fred Rose's name on it to like start their publishing business. And so the business gets off the ground. The business ends up making money so fast that they never actually touch that original $25,000. I guess you take loans out and, use that as backing. And then the business started paying for itself so fast that original $25,000 never gets used, which I just thought was interesting. But so they are successful pretty dang quick, and they start, that connection between these two guys is the first spark of the fire that is the music industry in Nashville today. Like, the way it all works, the dynamics between the artists and the publishing companies, like, this is where it starts. Because before that, it was just dudes that were popular on the radio, and it was all hillbilly music that, greater America did not take super seriously until Roy Acuff showed up. So this is where we start bouncing in to all kinds of really famous people. So, like, for example, back to our Hank Williams episode, where I said that Audrey Williams introduced Hank to Fred Rose. Well, apparently that happened. Now, remember, Audrey was a little bit of a pistol, and she was not, afraid of just walking up to people and introducing herself. Apparently, she goes to the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company, walks in. Somehow she catches Fred and Wesley Rose in a ping pong game. So he's just playing ping pong with his kid, and here comes Audrey Williams with Hank, and she just interrupts their game and won't let him leave until he gives Hank Williams the time of day, which that's where you get that story where Fred Rose sits down with Hank and is like, all right, write me a song, because Hank shows up with this catalog of songs that he'd written that Fred Rose is saying, this is some of the best songs I've ever seen. Did you really write all these? Or you just came out of nowhere? Okay, if you can do that, do it again, write me a song. And that's when Hank Williams writes, I think it was Mansion on a Hill, right there, pretty much in front of Fred Rose. And that's the beginning of the Hank Williams story. Like, that's when Hank Williams gets published. It's because this little publishing company between Rose and Acuff had just gotten off the ground. And here comes Audrey Williams, just full of, fire and, enthusiastic. She later, after Hank died, she would end up getting, I think there's a couple of legal battles with Acuff-Rose over Hank's royalties. But anyway, so initially, Audrey comes in, plowing her way through, gets Hank to meet Fred Rose, and that starts off Hank's career. And at the same time here, Roy Acuff, he's doing a great job as the front man of this company. He's getting into movies. He's having his own hit records come out. So business is a booming for the Acuff-Rose, company. And so now we're into, let's see here, 1940, like early 40s. Let's see here. Because Fred Rose's son Wesley is on his own, like, as this is happening through the years. He's an adult now, and he's working as I think he was a accountant for an oil company or something. So he had gone to college, and he was, he's an educated guy, and he knows business, right? So the Acuff-Rose Company is just Fred Rose and Roy Acuff just kind of doing their best, and it's not, neither one of them is educated in any of this, but they're just kind of making it work. And let's see here. So this is into, because Wesley Rose comes on and takes over the books. Let's see here. So we're into the 42 is when Hank Williams gets on with, Acuff-Rose. Roy Acuff has a son named Roy that's born in 1943. And then let's see here. So 1948 is when little Jimmy Dickens shows up on the scene. And he's another Acuff-Rose guy. So remember, he had gone on, little Jimmy Dickens goes on to help discover, some other people we've talked about. But so this is where little Jimmy Dickens gets his start. And let's see here. All right. So for clarification here, Wesley Rose was born in 1918. So in 1942, he comes on to kind of take over the business. Not really take over, but basically what happens is his dad invites him to come check out the books. And this guy, who's an accountant for an oil company, so this is right up his alley, realizes that the business is wildly profitable, but their books are a mess. And they were in need of professional help here. And so Wesley Rose tells his dad, look, I'll do this for you, but you got to let me kind of run the show on the back end because, I got to be more organized about this. And his dad lets him because, Fred Rose hated he had come to, by this point, he hated the business end of it. And he was, he didn't like the kind of corporate side. He just wanted to write songs and meet people and work with artists and, kind of do the fun part. So when his son comes in and says, hey, let me run the books and you just keep writing songs, he's happy to let that happen. So Wesley Rose becomes a big part of the company. And he even, early on here. So let's see here. So Wesley Rose is one that he signs Don Gibson, Felice and Boudleaux Bryant, which they'll come up in later stories. And then you start, let's see here. Tennessee Waltz happens in 1948. And Tennessee Waltz is largely the crown jewel of the Acuff-Rose catalog. It becomes their biggest hit for, by far. It's worth, a huge chunk of their catalog. And so that's in, relatively early here. So you realize that, where we are in the timeline, this is 1948. We're still in prime Hank Williams phase here. So even though this company has become an established thing, this is all in that same early time frame as Hank Williams. So, let's see here. So they're signing all these other artists. Hank dies in 1953, but that kind of keeps on, the train keeps a moving, and they're signing all these other people. Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers get signed, and that was Wesley starts to kind of flex his muscles here because he signs Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers, and let's see, there were a couple others here. Oh, Marty Robbins. Yeah, so this is, the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company. Again, like that's another guy we've already talked about. Let's see here. And then, so Fred Rose dies somewhere in here. Let's see here, where I'm losing my spot here. Because Fred Rose, yeah, that was 1954, Fred Rose dies. So that's early in the, music history line, because you got to imagine that's only like a year after Hank Williams died. So this is really early. But Roy Acuff lives on, I think he dies in like 1992 or something. So like there's decades later where it's just Roy Acuff and Wesley Rose running the show. Let's see here. So we're getting into, the 50s and 60s here. So Roy Acuff starts to pick up a lot more of a, hands-on approach to picking new artists and developing, their careers and stuff. So he's bouncing off people like Loretta Lynn, George Jones, and like basically every legend that's around at the time. Because basically, as we get on, in the years here, they get sold out, and we'll get there. But so let's see here. So the 60s, they're bringing up George Jones, Loretta Lynn, publishing their songs. 1962, Roy Acuff gets inducted to the Country Music Hall of Fame. I think he was the first of three. The three, not founding, but like the first three people in the Country Music Hall of Fame, I'm pretty sure was Fred Rose might have been one, and Roy Acuff definitely was. Let's see here. So Roy Acuff keeps it going. He's performing with Johnny Cash later. Let's see here. Yeah, so he's like one of these guys that is around the Opry the whole time. And so he sees everything from Hank Williams all the way through to towards the end of his career. He's on stage performing with Vince Gill and Garth Brooks. So he sees everything, like the early, this, like I said, he dies in 92, but he's, involved pretty much right up until the moment he dies. Let's see. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company eventually gets sold for like $15 million or something, which at the time, that's a lot of money. And it gets sold a couple of times. Like the catalog changes hands a couple of different times here, but basically it ends up with Sony Records. So now, like that's Sony is still one of the big names in Nashville. Like that's, they're a gigantic force in the music industry. And they are directly lineaged out, like at least their involvement of country music, like their entrance onto the music scene, they're the lineage of Roy Acuff and Fred Rose. They own all those catalogs now, and they own all those artists. Let's see here. 91. Yeah. Like, so even in towards the end of his life here, he's singing with, people that are still famous today. 1991, he receives the Kennedy Center honors for the National Medal of Arts. And then like I said, he dies in 92. And then in 1995, he gets posthumously, he gets a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, which, like I said, this is 1995. This is into my lifetime here. This guy that started off, both these guys, but like one of them is like playing ping pong with his kid, and then Audrey Williams just interrupts him and kicks off Hank Williams' career. He stays involved and stays, both these guys stay involved, playing music, doing the thing, and watch country music evolve all the way into the 90s. And then there's some other lawsuits that kind of come later that I think in the 80s they get sued. But basically I'm not going to find this fast enough. But there were a couple of lawsuits that happened that are basically talking about like sampling and what is good faith use and what's not. And so Acuff-Rose, like nowadays when you see people sampling music, even in pop and, every other genre, some of these legal battles that set the rules for what we have now was because of the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company and the legal battles that they entered into trying to protect their artists' royalties. Because they really did have, like, their intentions were seemingly pure right from the jump, that they were trying to protect their artists and get everybody the money that they were owed. They didn't seem at least in the accounts that I can find, they don't appear to be some predatory corporation that's just trying to squeeze artists for as much money as they can make. They really started trying to get their artists the money that they felt they were owed, because country music wasn't taken seriously at the time. And that, that machine just got spun up and got going and started making money. And as a venture, I don't think there are very many success stories better than that one, because that left its mark on country music forever. You can draw direct lines, back to the decisions that these guys were making. And anyway, so that is the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company. And we're going to kind of call back to this episode a lot, because as we talk about these other artists and how they bump into these people, we're kind of setting a foundation for future reference. So that is the Acuff-Rose Publishing Company. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.